Hello, and welcome to our latest edition of our Insightful Leaders Conversations. Today, we are talking about inspiring purpose and belonging, which is the first chapter in our paper From Human Focused to and Beyond Leadership. And I'm extremely pleased to be joined today to have this conversation by Julie Williams, who is the CEO of Butterfly Conservation. And Julie will say more in a second about what that is and who she is. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Louise Le Get, who, amongst other things, is a coach for 1080. Welcome, both of you. Let's start by giving you a space to introduce yourselves to anybody who is listening to us today. And Julie, let me come to you first.
Oh, thanks very much, Joan. So as Joan has said, I'm Julie Williams, and I'm really lucky enough to lead Butterfly Conservation, where we spend all of our days championing the incredible role that butterflies, moths play in the health of our natural world. So if you care about the state of the planet, these species matter more than most people realise, because they're early warning signs of environmental change, and they help Joan tell us a story of what's happening to nature around us. But alongside my love of the natural world, I am equally passionate about people. And I genuinely believe that when people feel valued and supported and connected to purpose, they can actually achieve extraordinary things. And helping people be the best that they can be, whether they're restoring habitats or working in finance, it's one of the most rewarding parts of my job. And that's why, thank you for inviting me today, because I am super excited about today's session. Purpose and belonging aren't just abstract leadership ideas for me. It's what makes organisations thrive. So when people see how their work contributes to something meaningful, especially in a mission-driven charity like BC, culture strengthens and the impact follows. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I'm very much looking forward to our conversation as well. Louise, welcome. And what would you like to say about you and the work you do for our audience?
Thank you, Jen. So very, very happy to be here this afternoon. And for me, my focus is really working with leaders in terms of how to navigate the current uncertainty that we're in to be able to create a new future, and using purpose in order to do that, both in terms of their own purpose and inspiring through purpose, as well as activating purpose in their teams and their people. And in terms of my background, so yes, I am contributing to 1080 through being a facilitator and a coach. And in terms of a wider piece, I've worked very much in the context of the full purpose world as a extended landscape. And what I mean by that is that often when we think about purpose, we can have quite narrow and siloed perspectives on where we can do purpose. And so I've worked in the purpose field and what I call the for impact field, whether it's in humanitarian organizations and with humanitarian organizations, social entrepreneurs, large multinationals, intrapreneurs, change makers, visionaries. So it's that whole spectrum that sometimes we don't kind of realize just how much there is and how much color there is in terms of that sector. So really look forward to contributing that conversation today.
Thank you, Louise. And just hearing both of you speak, I think we're going to find there are similarities and differences and overlaps over what you see within your own worlds around purpose and belonging. So let's get started into the conversation. Julie, I'm going to come to you first. And if you could share some thoughts with us around, for you, what does purpose mean in the environmental charity, and why does it matter now more than ever?
So thanks, Joan. That's a really great question, because when I think about purpose in an environmental charity concept, I'm sort of taken back to a day when I was out on site looking for marsh fritillary webs. Those of you who don't know, a marsh fritillary is a very threatened butterfly. I remember walking with the team, and we were walking slowly through the grass, scanning for signs of webs on the ground, and it just felt that there was nothing there. And then all of a sudden, one of the team spotted this little tiny web just hidden in the grass. It was barely visible, but it was proof that the species was there in that landscape. And that moment for me captures what purpose means in our sector. It's the understanding that every person in every role contributes to moments like that, moments when where nature begins to recover, however quietly. And I suppose for me, purpose isn't an abstract concept. It's that morning moment on that reserve, seeing evidence of a species returning against all odds, and knowing that every person in my organisation had a hand in making that possible.
Great, thank you. And I notice I'm already thinking, oh, and I wonder how you do that. I will hold that question for a moment because I am keen to hear from Louise and her perspective on, what is purpose from your perspective and why it matters, Louise.
And I'm loving Julie's passion in terms, and I definitely want to hear more about that. So I think also in terms of how I want to share about purpose, I want to give a bit of structure in terms of the thinking, because I think it's also about helping those of you listening today to our conversation to think about your own purpose. And I think so there's different ways of looking at purpose, and how we categorize it is you can think in terms of your work and your leadership, in terms of what I'd call a job. So, some people are focused on their purpose, which is to pay the bills. And, let's be honest, we all have to do that. And then for others, purpose is building a career. And that's traditionally what it's been a lot, especially in what I would say the more corporate kind of environments. And so there we're focused on climbing that ladder. And that gives us a sense of purpose, and also building more status, gaining more influence, gaining more power. And so we're building that piece. And then traditionally, we've looked at what I would call kind of that more thinking about purpose in terms of a calling. And that's where we look at it from the perspective of having a positive impact that we actually care about, which when I'm listening to Julie is very much where I think you're coming from. And for a long time, those different aspects have also been siloed. What I'm looking at is actually what lies beyond that, in the sense that what I see is at this time, we are very much at a fork in the road in terms of the kind of future that we want to create. Be it the sustainability crisis, what's happening in terms of AI, or also the kind of upheaval to the world order as we've known it up until now. And so what that's doing is it's having us really make choices about the kind of future that we want to create. And I think that's where purpose is evolving to, or purpose can have this different level of impact that is key at this time. And what I see in terms of that is that before we're still quite thinking about a destination that we're trying to get to, whether it's pay the bills, whether it's build our own kind of platform and power base, or it's having that specific impact. What I'm seeing is when we start to shift in terms of this idea of creating the future, it opens the door to a completely different definition and level of purpose, which is based on creativity, unleashing a new level of creation capacity based on authentic self-expression. So that's where I'm kind of at in terms of purpose.
Thank you so much for that, Louise. And again, that was very rich in hearing the different elements that both of you have been describing. So I was hearing there about the positive impact purpose and also our personal purpose. If I can bring it back, and Julie, I'm going to come back to you first around that positive impact, but linking it to that personal piece as well. Because you mentioned about, everybody in your organization in some way contributes to that morning moment that you described. So I'm curious, can you share with our listeners something around how do you create that sense of purpose for people in your organization who maybe are not naturally their first primary purpose or focus isn't about the butterflies or the moths. Maybe they are experts in their own field, but they've chosen to work for your organization. So how do you create that sense of purpose around that mission?
Yeah, thanks, Joan. And a lot of what Louise said really resonates with me when I sit and listen to you, Louise, because in short, one of the things that's really important for me is around creating purpose that connects to impact rather than sometimes that personal motivation, because we're not all motivated in the same way. And I think, for me, it's what impact are we delivering as a group rather than thinking about it any other way. And I think that's really interesting. As an environmental organisation, we have people, like you say, Louise, who are really passionate about the cause. And then we've got people who actually are motivated by different things. So, you could take a finance officer, for instance, So for me, it's about really being able to show them where their role impacts the work that we do on the ground. So if you're a finance officer, if you strengthen our financial controls as a finance officer, for instance, actually you're building funder trust. If our HR team recruit brilliant people, actually that directly impacts our organisation delivery on the ground. So it's really important for me to try and understand, what people's purpose is for them, exactly as you described, Louise, but then really how do we turn that into what meaningful impact means for them on the ground? And that is really looking at each core section of our organisation and showing a picture of this is what you achieve. It isn't just about being the person that goes out and looks at the marsh fritillary webs on the ground, even though that is really great fun.
So Julie, I'm hearing something there about direct line of sight to that impact, that for everybody in the organisation, they can trace the work they're doing in some way. They can see how it affects that final piece, if I can call it that, when the people are out there on site and looking for
Absolutely.
the butterflies.
To me, it's really interesting, isn't it? People look at the role they have within an organisation. And I think as a job as a leader in trying to create purpose and belonging, you have to really look and say, how do we highlight somebody's individual contribution here? It's not being a finance officer or a HR officer. It's what is my contribution here in delivering towards the environmental changes we want to make?
And I'm wondering, and Louise, I think you wanted to come in, so I'm going to let you. And as you speak, I'm wondering about how do we help people see that outcome? But let me hand over to you, Louise.
Yeah, Julie, when you were speaking, in relation to this concept of impact and having an impact together, I could really start to hear also those words that we're relating to what are we creating together. And I think that's what purpose is allowing us to do right now, because there's this piece where, and I think we all know it, and it definitely doesn't seem to be what you're experiencing and creating in your organization, Julie. But there's also these places where purpose is like this static statement that people haven't, kind of really brought to, that maybe you have a chat about in your performance review, and that's kind of about it, and I think that there's this piece where purpose and particularly now, if we want to have impact, and impact is about shaping things, and in order to shape things, purpose has to become something that's very dynamic, that is something that we live every day in some shape or form. And so it is this relationship between individual purpose and then how can we channel that into being able to create something together that is meaningful at a different level. And I just wanted to mention, because I worked for a long time with social entrepreneurs. I was part of an incubator for the UN around scaling up social enterprises for the SDGs. And one of the things I found really interesting there was that when I first joined, I assumed that because the incubator and their business, well, they're kind of businesses or social enterprises, were focused on having an impact and purpose, that they'd all be really fulfilled and that they would all be driven and inspired all the time. And what I found was that actually there's a piece where you have to constantly build that bridge between that person's inner sense of purpose and that kind of outer purpose. And so I found that lots of the social entrepreneurs actually were having phases where they weren't feeling that they were contributing meaningfully and on purpose. And we were like, but your business is. And so what we had to do was we had to reconnect them to ultimately a new level of that authentic self-expression, because in building the business and the organization, they'd actually lost that connection. So it was great to hear how you're doing that in your organization. It seems really successful.
Yeah, no, thank you, Louise. I think there's also something for me around honouring professional purpose as well, isn't it? And I think particularly when you live in an organisation that I live in, where, as I say, we've got these very passionate conservationists, and then I'm sorry for anybody who works in finance who I may be picking on, so apologies for that. But for me, that really is around that motivation that people have, and allowing ourselves to celebrate their craft, whether that be problem solving or finance. So I think for me as well, when I think about purpose in our organisation, I want to honour those professional skills that people bring and celebrate the purpose and belonging that those skills are needed within an organisation like mine.
And that's making me think of, how do we get purpose to feel collective? So by honouring those professional skills, I notice what's coming up for me is the word collective. Louise, again, you wanted to come in, so I'll let you come in, and then I can see that there's a question being posed, which I will ask you in a moment.
Yeah, I would love that. And I think, partly is Julie and I kind of are bouncing off each other in terms of some things that are being shared. So I'd like to come back to this finance piece, because I work with finance people around purpose. And what I see is, what I've learned is different people, just in terms of what I call their flow. So that when people are wanting to connect to purpose, I reconnect them to what I call their innate flow, which is when they feel naturally inspired, they naturally love what they're doing, they're completely lit up when they're connected to that, and usually we lose track of times and track of time. And having worked with kind of thousands of people on this, I always find there's something magical about it, in the sense that everybody's flow is different. And maybe some elements are the same, and so my flow is different to yours, but I've known, and I work with people who are really in flow in terms of the finance piece, and I'm super grateful for that. But what I also find is that they're able to have this place in the transition as well, which is mirroring what you were saying, Julie, about everybody bringing their professional expertise in different ways. And I'm seeing it because I actually see that we're in a systemic transition right now, or that's my suspicion. And so there needs to be a new level of inventiveness. And I'm seeing a lot of these finance people at the moment come up with really interesting new ways of raising financing, raising funds, or even structuring the way that we think in terms of finance, to be able to enable that transition. So I find it also really fascinating how everybody has got a role to play, but we just have to get creative enough around it.
I think it comes back as well. You said something around dynamic, and that sits really well with me, Louise. I think, people's purpose, I think sometimes can shift. And I think as an organisation, I think you have to be really careful that you keep reconnecting your people to their purpose and the purpose of the organisation. Because I think over time, my experience is that people's individual purpose changes over time, depending on what's going on in their lives around them. And so I think having that, making sure things are dynamic and agile is really important. And that reconnection between organisational purpose and what your individual purpose is, and what you are trying to achieve in terms of your own impact.
And if I can just add, I know, Joan, you said you had a question, but I just add one piece on that is, and I think it's part of this difference between the static purpose and what I call this dynamic purpose. So when I work with leaders, and many leaders work with me kind of year on, and we keep going, because how we see it is, if you look at it at purpose as a creation exercise, then every year it's like there's a new cycle of what you create in alignment to purpose. So and then your purpose deepens. It might kind of it's always in the same ocean, that it might kind of shapeshift in various ways, and there's also constantly, like every year, like, what are you creating this year that is part of guided by your purpose, but is part of this vision of what you want to actually create on the ground. And that's how I think we start to have impact at a completely different level.
Yeah, and I know, sorry, Joan, you are wanting to come in. Sorry. But actually, I'm sorry, Louise and I could talk for ages. I think there's also something for Louise, for me as well, is around, from an environmental organisation's point of view, the world is a really scary place. We have a lot of our staff are really worried, when you look around the geopolitical landscape at the moment. And a lot of my staff are saying, well, we need to do more. We need to be looking at social injustice, not just looking at environment. So if you look at the wars around the world and you go, actually, there's a huge social issue here, but there's also a huge environmental impact as well. And that's really difficult as a chief exec of an environmental organisation in England, where we're saying, well, actually, do you know what? We can't do that work over there because our purpose is here. And then how do you keep that motivation and sense of belonging with our staff who really want us to do and expand our reach further? And that's that really interesting dichotomy, isn't it, about purpose from an organisational point of view, and then that individual drive and belonging that people want to see.
And actually, Julie, that's a really lovely link to the question that has been posed by Alison. So Alison is asking, how do you create inner purpose if someone has lost the connection? So do either of you any thoughts on that? Julie, let me come to you first.
I think it's going back to real basics, Joan, and really, really getting that person to reconnect to the small things. So it's the small wins, it's the small impacts that we're having. I think sometimes, particularly for organisations like mine, where environmental anxiety is so big, it is completely overwhelming sometimes. I could sit in a dark room and go, wow, we're not making the impact we need to make. We're not moving quick enough. You know, species are declining at a rapid rate. Goodness, Julie. But actually, it's about reconnecting back to the small things. What was the small win that we did last week? And it's around that storytelling. And it's around showing people that even every small step we make makes a difference. And I think sometimes as an organisation, taking a breath and reflecting on, well, what are we doing, however small, is really important.
And I notice there's a few thoughts coming in my head as you say that. You know, one is about how you then help them connect that back to their own personal purpose. So it depends what the connection has been lost for them. But again, that piece around, you know, what am I here to do for me? What's my drive or my purpose? And how does that align and fit with the organisational one? And just very briefly, what came into my head as you were saying that, Julie, is I remember not long after the pandemic that as people were starting to be allowed to connect again in the human form, at BC, at Butterfly Conservation, you did some sessions where people could come along and learn about a particular element of the conservation work. And I remember talking to some people who are not conservationists, but work in the organisation. And that ability to see the moths, for example, was just really inspiring for them. For me, that's one of those moments that probably did help people reconnect in a really powerful way to the overall purpose of the organisation. And as you can see, it stuck with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do try every year, we try and encourage all of our staff to get out with other members of staff wherever in the country. Go and look for marsh fritillary webs in the grass. I tell you, it's amazing. You know, and actually it is around that reconnection with the cause, being out in a field, being out and seeing butterflies flying. There is something wonderfully amazing about that. But I'm very lucky to work for an organisation that create those opportunities for people to reconnect. Yeah. I accept that that may be more challenging for different specialists.
Thank you. So Louise, on that note, what would you like to say to Alison in response to her question?
I think there's two different pieces, because we can interpret that connection in also different ways, is in the sense that where's that disconnection coming from? Is it coming, for example, what I've found is because there's so much now going on in the world, even though I've worked in the purpose field now for 26 years, there was this point, a bit like what Julie's describing, is, well, is what I'm doing enough? Is it right? Is it, so there's been a moment of, this is interesting. And because of this bigger context. And so what I would say is, I just want to speak to that first. And then there's the other piece, which is where I've worked a lot and often more in the corporate sector, where people are really disconnected from purpose. So I think it's maybe, if I can just speak to those 2 points quite quickly. So in terms of the Julie's point, there's a piece there on, so my personal belief is I frame it as a system shift, and that is a system shift. We're kind of in this chrysalis where it's all kind of chaotic, but, you know, that's what happens to go from being a caterpillar to becoming a butterfly. And so we are in that kind of butterfly making process, but it's hard sometimes to see that is the case. And the reason why I like to frame it that way is it helps me think about how what we're actually doing is we can focus on what comes next. And the bits that we're creating are part of like a bigger garden. So maybe it's because of Julie's but I always use the analogy of everything that we've got to do in terms of purpose is like a big garden, and everybody has their individual garden patch. And so as long as I take care of my garden, then that's good. And make sure and remind others to take care of their garden. But also in each one of our garden, we can create new blueprints, because a lot of what we're doing is actually quite pioneering and visionary. It's new because we're having to constantly find new solutions. And it reminds me, I was once working with a CEO of a large utilities company around purpose. And it was in Switzerland. And I'll always remember, he said to me, the thing is, in Switzerland, we have resources, so we can experiment on a lot of those renewable aspects. And then we can create the blueprints, and then we can give them away to other countries and to places where it would be a lot more complicated. And that's always stayed with me. So I'm thinking, right, what blueprints can I create? And how can I make sure that the leaders I'm working with are creating blueprints? And then how can we spread those blueprints? So I think that's kind of one of those pieces, because then we're scaling our impact, which is really what we're being called to right now. And then the second piece, in terms of leaders and reconnecting them, if you're completely disconnected from your purpose, then start with flow. Because what happens is that often as we grow up, so when we're younger, we're connected to purpose and flow and who we really are. And then as we grow up, we build what I call survival personalities, which have us disconnect from that natural flow. And so the place to start when you feel that disconnection is coming back to that flow from there.
Thank you, Louise. And I'm very conscious of our time. I mean, we've all said it already. We could talk on this for a long time, but we've got about 3 minutes left for today. And so with that in mind, and I'm just thinking there about your blueprints comment that you've just made, Louise. Julie, what would you like to say to the leaders who may be listening today about what they can be doing? What's your words of advice / wisdom to them in order that they continue to inspire purpose and belonging within their organizations?
I think it is around really trying to find out what drives and motivates individuals, whatever they do within an organization, and connect the dots is what I would say. Connect the dots between their own purpose and the purpose of the organization. And I think it is not about contribution, it's about impact. So demonstrating the impact, valuing them, valuing their professional status, and showing them the impact is what I would say is really important.
And that's very much about what they can do for others. What about the thing around authenticity and being themselves? Why do you think that is important for leaders to do that in order that they can inspire others?
I think particularly in my sector, what's really important is people don't join the environmental sector for perks or profits. They join because it has values. And I think it's really important as a leader that you are living the values, both your own personal values and those values of the organization. I think to be authentic, you have to be open, you have to be transparent, you have to be seen to be living the values of the organization. And I think that is really important. It's the only way for me that you build any credibility.
Great, thank you. And I noticed Michael had put a question: how do you create purpose if your employer isn't about big picture imperatives, but much smaller, maybe incremental changes? And I think that piece about living values starts to connect with that. And both of you said start with flow, but bring it back to individual drivers. It's about helping people make that connection to what, as you've been saying, what's important to them and how that fits with what the organization is doing. Louise, let me give you a moment in our last moment or so to respond either to what Julie was saying, to the question, or even the question that Michael has asked.
I think the piece that I guess I, in a way, would like to leave people with, because I think that's connected to that, is that we have an amazing opportunity for purpose right now, because there's this focus on not just predicting the future. Everybody's trying to predict the future, but actually what we're meant to be doing is creating it. And so a lot of the more traditional roles, which have been what I call focus on managing the existing status quo, and in a way that probably is what some of the tasks that Michael is mentioning in his question. Well, a lot of those aspects, even with AI, probably for a start, they might be automated in the future, let's be honest. And so where our kind of future of work is going, it's going to be around harnessing people's individuality at a different level, what they are naturally strong at, what drives them to be able to activate a new levels of value add, because that's going to be the big conversation. What is the value add of AI, and what is the value add of a human being? And on top of that, where we're headed in terms of future, I'm an optimist, but it's not looking great. So we're going to have to make some leaps and bounds, and not just keep moving the furniture around, from one deck to another when you're still on the Titanic. There comes a point where we need to be activating our people to look at what we want to create that is different. And so that's where I see the amazing opportunity in terms of purpose, and then creating new ways of having an impact. The well-being economy is coming through, and in that whole area, that's expanding right now. It's not contracting. So that's where I see the future is.
And I'll need to stop you there, Louise, because we are at time for now. It has gone incredibly quickly. Let me just check, Julie, are there any final words that you would like to say to close us off?
I think Louise actually tied me in very lovely. Thank you, Louise. Is for me that people are the heart of everything, and AI is important. But when I think about nature, and I think the state of nature in our environment, we cannot restore and protect nature if we do not have people at the heart of it. And so that was very nicely. Thank you, Louise. You led me into that around we need people to fight for our environment.
Great. There is a question that we don't have time to answer right now, but if both of you are happy, we'll share the question with you, and then we can put something out on LinkedIn for that question. And it's about how you do that reconnecting. But if you're both fine with that, we'll pick that up now when we're not live, and we'll put something out on LinkedIn. Thank you both so much for your time and your conversation today. It has been very inspiring in engaging with you in this conversation. And I hope everybody who is listening to this has found that inspiring and helpful as well. We will be continuing our Insightful Leaders session, so look out for information about our next topic. That will be coming out very soon. But for right now, thank you for listening in to us. I wish you well for the rest of the day, whatever time zone you are in. Thank you all, and goodbye.